he manufactures hardware. He has many years of experience working with various companies like MCI and Atlantic Records in New York City. So he's gonna be sharing all his experience, and also he's gonna talk about the products that he creates and he sells in Sweetwater.
When did you realize that you wanted to pursue this as a career?
Well, I wanted to be a recording engineer, you know. I had taken guitar lessons when I was a kid, and I saw the Rolling Stones, and after that it was like I wanted to work in the music business. And I didn't play the guitar as well to be an artist, so I thought I'd be a recording engineer. But grew up in Ohio, and I didn't know quite how to get from there to being in the industry. And it was back in the early 70s, and I was a hippie. I hitchhiked to California,
Wow.
to San Francisco, and I happened to be living in a neighborhood where it was a terrible neighborhood, and it was like one building looked nice. So one day I knocked on the door and asked him, what are you guys? And it was Wally Heider's recording studio. And I said, give me a job. And the guy said, no. He said, you got to either know somebody or you got to know electronics. So I went back to Ohio. I learned of electronics. I moved to Fort Lauderdale, and I luckily got a job at MCI. And then I learned everything.
Wow. Nothing comes easy, right? In this industry is really tough.
It is a difficult place to be. I still thought I wanted to be a recording engineer until I realized really what the job was, which is anybody that comes through the door, you got to make them sound as good as you can. I wanted to work on music that I liked, and that's not the job. The job is to make whoever walks through the door sound as good as you can. So, but by then I was a service engineer for MCI, and I was going around to all the top studios in the world and fixing the equipment that they'd sold them. And I liked it, and I continued to do that. And I'd been to New York many, many times to Atlantic Records because they were all MCI. And they told me, you know, if you ever feel like leaving MCI, give us a call, we'll hire you. So when Sony bought MCI, it didn't seem like it was good for me, and I left and came to New York.
Oh. That's where you're now? New York?
I live in New York now, yeah. I moved up here in 1982, before all you guys were born. and I've been here ever since. I worked at Atlantic for a long time, and then I worked at another company that sold gear called Martin Audio. And then they went out of business, and I just worked for myself, servicing studios. And I got a call from a guy at Sam Ash Music and said that I knew from working at Martin. And he said, we get a lot of calls for VU meters. I know you can build stuff. You build them, we'll sell them. And that's how I started making audio gear. And then I built a switcher, and then I built this, and I built that. And it's been a good run. I had no plan, but hey, it worked out, you know.
Can you list the products that you create a little bit?
I build VU meters. I build alternate speaker switching. I build surround level controls and surround level switching, so you could A/B to surround, like if you're trying to match last week's mix to a CD or something. I build a lot of DAW monitor controllers. With talkback, without talkback, with summing, analog summing. I kind of live between the D to A output and the speakers. That's basically where my products fit into the studio.
My name is Brian Chen, and I'm also a commercial music technology major along with Casey, and I'm planning to be an audio engineer one day as well.
It's all who you know. Meet as many people as you can. Go to conventions. They don't have conventions now because of the pandemic, but.
Can you describe the most exciting project you have completed?
When I was working at Atlantic, Mick Jagger came in, and that was very exciting for me, you know, to I'm supposed to be there doing my job and he's there working on a project, that was very exciting for me. But what I do now, I get a concept of a new product, which usually I get from end users. Like if I'm at a convention and somebody comes up and says, yeah, that's great, but I need a little bit of different kind of thing going on, I'll take that and I'll expand on it. And then I have to design it and it doesn't work, I mean, when you first build something, it doesn't work. And then you work on it and you work on it. And then it's like, boom, there it is. It works. It's doing what I wanted to do, That's a very good feeling when you accomplish that first design. And then you build the first one and it's like, okay, this is a product. This is what it's going to look like. Then you got to build 100 of them.
Right.
That's not as much fun as the first one. The first one is the most fun. It's the accomplishment of getting over the hump and it works and everything.
So the next question is, the business has changed a lot. Now we use a lot of digital and we do a lot of the process in the box, right? So as an analog manufacturer, which are the best ways to combine the analog and the digital technologies?
When you mix down, I think summing analog sounds better. It's easier to get a good sound. You can get as good a sound in the box, I think. I've been told. I don't do sessions, so I don't know. But I've been told by some big-time guys like Jimmy Douglas, and they say that you can do anything that you can do analog summing, you can get it accomplished in the box. You just have to be a little bit more careful about what you're doing. So as usual, you have to know what you're doing to get it to be the right way. Whereas if you come out and you go to analog, whether it's a console or a summing box, you have faders and you can do a mix like in the old days with, and you're using the DAW as a tape deck.
What is the most rewarding part of what you do?
Making the sale is always the best part. I've sold a lot of gear to broadcasters and to big time studios and stuff. And when you get a client that really enjoys and uses the product and will give you an endorsement and things like that, it's very rewarding to know. I'm sitting in my house, I build this stuff by myself. I'm a one-man operation. I don't have employees or anything like that. I answer the phone. There's not even a computer answering the phone. So when you get a client that really likes your gear, it's very rewarding. Just this week, Sylvia Massey, I'm going to have the ads in Recording Magazine. Sylvia Massey is a mastering engineer and a recording engineer out in Oregon. And she's very popular. And she's given me a couple of endorsements in that.
So how are analog VU meters beneficial for those of us who are working exclusively in the digital domain?
A VU meter is an analog audio meter, and it is an averaging meter. So that means it's kind of like how we hear. We don't hear every peak and everything. I mean, we hear the peaks, but they go by so fast, we're not really aware of them. And the meter is not either. So I put a little red LED in the meter so that once you hit plus 18, which is 2 dB before clipping in your DAW, it'll flash red. And you know that if it's on for any length of time, you've clipped the signal and you're not getting that information above. Now the meters that are inside the box are reading the numbers. They're telling you what the digital signal is. But the digital signal is a number inside the box and the analog signal is outside the box, and that's how we hear. We hear in an averaging waveform. It's not like those numbers inside the box. Every meter tells you different information. A peak meter, if you've ever seen in the old Neve consoles, they had these black-faced with white logo peak meters, which if you follow them very carefully, you'll find that you're it's not so loud, because you're being conservative with the levels, because you're seeing all the peaks go by. So then you got to bump it up, but then if you go too far, you clip the signal. And everything that's out there right now, unless you're listening to classical music, is clipped. period. I could show you on an oscilloscope. It's just flat topped. And that's because they want it to be louder. You know, when you're going down the radio dial, it's just like in the old days. When you're going down the radio dial, the loudest signal is what you end up on, and you listen to that.
So what are some other products that you have created?
I build a lot of monitor controllers. So when you come out, you want to hear it. But if you just take the output of your D to A and go to the speakers, it's way too loud for you to sit in the room. So you need a level control, but not some cheap volume pot that doesn't track. Your stereo balance, you know, if you get down to lower levels, starts bouncing around. So I use a 4-gang stepped attenuator, and it tracks to 0.05 dB, so I can have a balanced audio signal go through the box without any electronics. You can turn the power off, it still works. This is my volume pot. So you would have the high signal and the low signal on the left side, the high signal and the low signal on the right side. So like in an XLR, you know, you have 3 pins. I'm going to get technical with you guys. So just when they talk about balanced audio, the high signal and the low signal are out of phase. So if you have a long run of wire and there's noise in the environment and it gets into the wire, the high signal and the low signal are out of phase, okay? But when you're running along the wire, the noise goes into both of them in phase. When you get to where you're going, you flip the phase of the one, and because you flip the phase of the noise, it cancels. So now you don't have any of the noise and you've got the audio signal. So you'll try to stay balanced in a studio. So with level controls, a lot of times they'll just have a left and a right, but that's an unbalanced signal, which is fine. That doesn't mean it's bad. But if any noise gets in, you won't have it cancel at the input to the power amp. So that's why I use that. This is a QS8 Mark II, and you can see the volume pot here. It also has a Q mixing section so that you can, it has talkback. You have a talkback level control here. And then you have the Q that they would hear in the headphones here. And then there's also an aux3, which is like if you were doing a vocal overdub, you could have the vocal here, and if they want more me, you could just turn it up in their Q mix to the headphones. And then once you get these balances the way you want, you have a master Q for the overall level to the headphone mix. So it makes it easier than like the vocalist wants more of themselves, and you got to find the page in the computer and find the level control and bring it up, and you forgot what you were doing, you know. With this box, you just reach over there and turn the knob and you're back to work again. This also has an analog summing position. If you have this pushed, you'll get this stereo audio signal in number aux1, aux2, you'll get aux3, and you also get the Q input, and they all sum together analog, and it comes out on the mix output here. I built these over the last 2 days, and I assembled them this morning, so I happen to have one out there. So,
oh, that's great. You also work with monitors and speaker management devices and equalizers, right?
I have an equalizer. Which is a copy of an MCI console that I used to build when I worked at MCI, the JH500 series. Had a very good EQ. And I build a direct copy of that, but the steps are 2 dBs, and that's too much for the mastering world. So I reduce those to half dB steps and build a mastering version. It's the same frequencies, it's the same curves. It's just less. Mastering guys, they can hear stuff that we don't even know.
What were some of the biggest struggles that you've had in the industry or in your career?
When you lose your job, that's the biggest struggle, you know. When I moved up here, I knew where I was going. I had Atlantic Records, they moved me. I mean, they wanted me to come and work for them, so that was really great. When I left there, it's a long story. The manager that hired me was a great guy, and then another guy came in and Paul left. It got to be really bad. I couldn't earn a living, you know. because he cut all the hours down. So I had to go do something else, and I'm living in New York City, and it's expensive. And I luckily, again, knew a guy, and he was leaving Martin Audio, and I got in where he left. It's always who you know, always who you know. And you never know who you know when you meet them, you know. It's later on that you figure, oh yeah, I can call him and see what's up with that, you know. That's it's always who you know.
What else of your products would you add that we can be missing if we're only using those plugins and samples?
When you're doing a mix, or even in the box, it's coming out. In the end, it's always analog. That's my slogan. In the end, it's always analog. The most important thing for me is to keep that stereo image intact, and into a surround, it gets even to be more. So you have to maintain the balance. And when you have a cheap level control and it gets down, not, you know, up at 0 or like 2 o'clock on the scale, you know, when you turn it up to around 2 o'clock on the clock face, it's going to track pretty good. Left and right's going to be where you think it is. But maybe as the day goes on, you turn it down a little bit, and all of a sudden the right side is louder than the left side. And that's because the volume pod is not up to par, you know. So I always use this. And I have them like 7.1. This is only 4, but I have a 7.1 level control that is 8 wafers, because it gets crazier when it gets into surround. And you still have to maintain it. But now it's not just left and right, it's 6 or it's 8. Or some of these Atmoses are really like 20, you know. And maintaining that balance for me is the goal. And I don't want to do it, I try to do things passive. My goal is to try to do things passive, because the minute that you put electronics in the path, there's a itty bitty tiny bit of noise coming from the power supply. And there's a frequency response because you're using the electronics. If you're passive, there's no power supply, so there's no noise, and there's whatever comes in comes out. You just control the volume. So everything, even if you can't hear it, you may sense it. You know, the higher frequencies, like dogs would hear. It's not that we don't feel that sometimes. You feel it, especially if you have it up loud enough. But like things out of our hearing range doesn't mean that we don't experience them. Whatever's coming at me is, I don't want to color it. I don't want it to be like, oh yeah, that sounds so great. It shouldn't sound like anything. My gear should not be part of the equation, you know? You want a sound, you go for an equalizer or a limiter or a compressor. You'll get what you want. But when it gets to going to the speaker, that's not when you're coloring it, because you're not going to be recording it then. It's going to be something, and you listen to it and you think, oh yeah, this is what I want, and then you go back to recording in your car, or you're listening somewhere else, and it doesn't sound like that, and you don't know why. Well, it's because of the monitor controller.
So you make all of your products by hand?
I design the circuit boards, and then I buy the parts, and I stuff the circuit boards and solder them in, and then I connect them all together. This house is filled with parts. If I had it on the cell phone, I could go show you the shop. I've got parts in every room. There's no room for anyone else. A lot of times if I'm trying to, like, I get rarely, but I do get service calls still. And if somebody has an MCI piece of gear, I can't help myself. I have to go because I have such loyalty to that company.
Yeah, that's the studio that I mostly record in is analog. We have the MCI 5.
500?
So, yeah.
I built that.
Yeah?
Wow.
Yeah. What's the name of the studio?
Homebred Studios.
Homebred.
Right.
I don't know them. In Fort Lauderdale, or where at?
In Miami Gardens, Florida.
Miami Gardens. Okay.
So pretty much, well, now since I know that you pretty much worked with like MCI boards, like what is your favorite series of MCI boards and why?
Oh, the 500 was had the best EQ. That was a good equalizer in that thing. That's why that's the one I copied. And the series before that was a 400. And the EQ, some of the EQ was the same, but it wasn't as elaborate, you know? Right. When they went and made the 500, they used those switches. They don't have pots. It's a click stop, you know, on all the levels and on the frequency. So you can return to where you were and you don't have to think, you know, when they went to the 600, the next version up, it was all rotary pots and it wasn't, you didn't know where you were, you know? I mean, you get close, but you didn't know.
You think that the audio tech school, do you think it gave you like an edge when you finally started working in studios and at MCI, or did you gain more knowledge there?
No, there was no audio tech school when I went to an electronics trade school, and they were turning out TV technicians, because that's the way the chapter would be vacuum tubes. The last 2 paragraphs were transistors. And when I got out into a job, it was all op amps. It was a very basic electronics school. United Electronics Institute, but it wasn't like an audio school like they have audio schools today.
Yeah, true.
It wasn't like that. And I don't know, you know, you learn stuff in the audio schools that's important and everything, but like when you get the job, you're going to have to go get coffee. You have to understand this. This is not like you're going to be out unless you have the money to build your own studio and start recording people, which you should do in your apartment at home. But when you get a job, then they're paying you, you're going to be the gopher for a while until somebody's sick and you have to sit there at the board next to the engineer, you know. But you should always watch what everybody is doing.
So where do we find your products?
Okay, well, Sweetwater is my biggest dealer.
Sweetwater.
They gave me a landing page. Coleman Audio is my web page, and on Facebook I got a Coleman Audio page, and then I got a Glenn Coleman page. I usually post gear on the Coleman Audio page. I don't really try to have people in the picture.
Yeah, it has been very interesting.
I'm glad
was an honor, definitely.
Yeah, to meet you. And
Yes, it was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Coleman.
Yes, very nice to meet you too.